Well folks, after nearly a decade when this fight was first announced in 2016, this upcoming Death Battle episode will finally feature two of the series' most anticipated combatants, who are also known to be proficient scythe wielders in their own universe. One being Ruby Rose from the animated web series Ruby, and Maka Elborn from the classic anime/manga series Soul Eater, along with her partner and weapon Soul Evan. And upon finding out that this particular matchup is actually happening, I gotta say it's a bit of a weird one for me. Because on paper, despite being relatively weaker than most of the characters in the Soul Eater universe, Maka ironically should be stronger than Ruby. However, Maka's overall strength is really dependent on how well she works with Soul, and without him, her abilities would diminish a lot, making her no different than a regular human. Granted, you could argue that Ruby is no powerhouse herself, especially since her combat prowess when now relying on her main weapon Crescent Rose isn't something to write home about. Yet, she is far from being a pushover, so it's best not to underestimate her too much. Also, while the outcome of this fight may seem obvious, it's actually more complicated once we take a deeper look and get a better understanding of each combatant's abilities. So, with all that being said, welcome to Animanko 9000, a channel where we talk about contents related to anime, manga, and other types of media. And in this video, I'm here to find out whether Ruby vs Maka is close or not. Also, if you want to hear more contents like the ones I mentioned earlier, just subscribe to my channel and don't forget to hit the noti bell. Alright, first on the docket are the character's strength and attack power. But before I begin, I want to make it clear that Maka is certainly not at the versatile level, nor is she comparable to Shinra, the main character from the series Fire Force, who, spoiler alert, at the end of this series practically made the Soul Eater universe. No disrespect here, but y'all scaling Maka's power way too high. I mean, that's basically saying that Krillin is comparable to Goku, which is ridiculous. That being said, considering that she did survive and fought off the likes of Ashura and Krona at the end of Soul Eater, I will agree that her overall strength is almost close to moon level, thus making her far stronger than what Ruby is usually capable of. However, I did say almost, because truth of the matter is, alone, she was clearly no match for either of the two. Heck, Maka herself acknowledged how comparatively weak she is to everyone else, and the only reason she was able to strike Ashura at all was because of the teamwork she had with Kid, Blackstar, and whoever else was involved. Same thing with Krona near the end of the series, and even though Maka for a moment did fought the former off for a bit on her own, it was mainly because she was using her father's spirit as a weapon, who, by the way, is more powerful than Soul, despite being the same weapon type. What's more, her power is kind of tricky to get a grasp on. You see, in order for Maka to reach her maximum level, she needs to perform Soul Resonance with Soul. So, as long as her partner stays by her side, she does gain some boost in power, as well as offensive techniques. Here's the thing though, while Soul Resonance does increase her physical stats, particularly by activating a substance known as Black Blood and wearing it as some sort of armor, it's hard to quantify at just how strong she is with it, especially since she only used it 3 times, and during those times, her opponent was either in a much weaker state, in a non-corporeal form, or was just too strong in every way. As such, even if we can assume that her stats does get stronger from each usage, with her third form being the strongest, I'm not sure if she is physically moon level. For all we know, her best strength could be comparable to how Ruby is, and she was strong enough to hold down and drag a giant Nevermore up a cliffside, and then behead it with no issue. Of course, she had some support when doing it, but still an impressive feat. Also, despite Soul Resonance amplifying the Meisters and weapons power and ability to a certain degree, the resulting power-up does vary for each character. And based on what I've read and seen as I look back into this series, as much as I can, I don't think the technique has ever increased Maka's attack power, at least not with Soul, and not in a way as how Soul Resonance would help increase Blackstar's physical attacks and Kid's more destructive attacks. I'm honestly not making this up. In fact, Maka pretty much confirmed it herself during her second fight against Kiriko, where she stated that she has problems fighting against those with more direct power. Yes, you could argue that Ruby isn't strong enough to produce large attacks, but considering how she's able to swing, much less carry Crescent Rose, a weapon that is twice her size, and could frankly be heavier than however much Soul weigh with practical ease, Ruby's strikes could actually push Maka back a bit, and even if that's not the case, Crescent Rose's recoil could allow her to achieve massive impact force, so it's doable. Now, that's not to say that Soul Resonance doesn't grant Maka a few set of attack-based skills that can harm her enemies, but rather than an actual power-up, it's more accurate to say that she obtained the right set of tools that can help her effectively kill her opponents. In this case, most of those set skills were specifically used to kill evil beings or cancel out magic-based attacks. Think of it as how someone uses kryptonite to fight against Superman. It helps even the odds, but it doesn't make them stronger. Furthermore, I'm not sure if those very skills will have any effect on Ruby, who is generally a pure-hearted character. I mean, Maka can still use them to produce shockwaves and defend herself from other opponents' attacks, but that's it. To put it all in one sentence, while Maka has more power than Ruby, she doesn't seem to have the right or enough offensive ability to overpower the latter. If I have to give the best example, I would almost compare her to Byung-gyo, a character from Solo Leveling who happens to be a healer. For more context, while his level of power is within the same rank as his fellow top-ranked hunters in the series, said power are mostly used to perform incredible support-type magic. And despite having some combat ability, is actually one rank lower according to himself. For that, Ruby might actually have a slight chance of winning this fight. However, whether or not she can actually damage Maka, well, it depends on the situation. Because when not using Soul Resonance, Ruby could deal a lot of damage against Maka, but with it, it's nearly impossible, especially knowing that Black Blood can greatly increase the latter's defense and durability, such as how it allowed Maka to withstand most of Ashura's attacks, and even heal from them. However, as I said earlier, that's only when she is performing Soul Resonance, which requires a great amount of concentration. Plus, using Black Blood comes with the risk of her sanity, so Maka probably can't wear it for too long. As such, if Ruby can somehow break that concentration, or even separate the Meister and weapon even briefly, then her chance of victory could increase. Now, in the case of Ruby's durability, like most of the characters in her show, she can use aura to increase it, but compared to most, hers is kind of a glass cannon. It's still strong nonetheless, so if the fight heads into a situation where both combatants are fighting without weapons, while also assuming that Maka's normal physical stats is above average, I doubt it'll be enough to really bypass Ruby's aura, as the former will likely do minimum damage against Ruby. But with Soul by her side, yeah, a few hits and Ruby is done. At the same time, however, that's only if Maka can hit Ruby, which now brings down to a particular category that's hard to get a clear answer of, and that's each character's speed. No, really, this subject is kinda confusing, especially how there is no exact calculative speed for both combatants. Some say that Maka is faster because she could keep up with Blackstar, though I'm not entirely convinced on that, while others have said the same for Ruby, due to her semblance being able to grant her a quick burst of speed, as well as greater momentum. Regardless, assuming that they are equally fast in some way, including their reaction speed, then the biggest factor really comes down to who has better mobility. And I know most of you will disagree on this, but I think Ruby wins this round. I'm serious, I really think that Ruby might have better mobility here. Again, mostly due to her semblance, but because of it, she can easily dodge attacks, outmaneuver her enemies, and quickly counterattack them. Sure, Maka does have the flight advantage, but I don't think she can quickly change direction in mid-air like Ruby can. Of course, much like Ruby's semblance, Maka's flight ability can allow her to attack at high speeds, but it probably won't be as strong as the former, as Ruby was capable of creating a strong tailwind using her semblance. With that in mind, I say Ruby got this category, but you know, I'm not delusional to admit that I could be wrong by the time Death Battle aired this episode. Still, in regards to their combat ability, this one has to go to Ruby, especially when you compare their scythe-wielding skills. Don't get me wrong, Maka's scythe handling is no joke, and she is a fairly good fighter like her fellow top Meisters, but much of those complex maneuvers are done by Soul's control over his weapon form, and without him, her skills for this set of weapon is rather poor, and even though she did improve her skills later on, I doubt it will be equal to Ruby's scythe-wielding skills, which are highly advanced, like actual pure skills that were clearly been nurtured through great amount of training. Not to mention, Ruby's Crescent Rose is also a gun. That means she can attack at close range and long range too, as well as keeping herself a safe distance away from Maka's close range strikes. Also, as an extra bonus, Ruby can increase her attacks using a specific element called Dust, which could give Maka some bit of trouble. Yes, without Crescent Rose, Ruby's unarmed combat style is very inept, especially if by some off chance both Maka and Soul were to jump on her. However, thanks to her semblance, she is not completely helpless. So, even if Ruby somehow gets separated from her weapon, she can quickly retrieve it, or use her powers to push her opponents back a bit. Though I guess same can be said on how Soul can run back to Maka if they get separated, but Ruby might be able to prevent that. Additionally, I feel like the level of combat is more obvious when you look at the way they fight with their respective teammates. In Maka's case, I notice how she usually stands behind Blackstar and Kid, and let them do most of the attacking, and only attack at certain moments to assist. Obviously, that doesn't mean she doesn't fight up front as well, but most times she does it to give her teammates an opening for them to attack. Not unlike how Ruby fights with her team, but contrast to Maka, she does pair up with each member of her team and more often take turns attacking up front. Honestly speaking, this is based on what I observe, but I still stand by the fact that Ruby is the better fighter, at least when using her weapon. Now, as for their individual powers, well, most of Maka's abilities seem to be within the support category, and those like Witch Hunter and Demon Hunter seem to only affect evil beings, so they might be useless. Of course, besides Ruby's semblance, the same can be said about her silver eyes, as I'm sure it won't work against Maka. The only ability that I know however could give Maka the win is her and Soul's ability to attack the Soul, and unless Ruby has some way to defend against that, well, I hate to say it, but she is cooked. Then again, if Ruby's silver eyes by some chance can unleash a strong wavelength that can not only repel but also overpower Maka's and Soul's wavelength, disorienting them long enough so she can deal the finishing blow, then it's her win. Indeed, it is a bit of a stretch, and you could counter that based on how Maka was able to use Soul Perception around the world, but it's hard to equivalent that to power. Anyway, that's pretty much it of my analysis, but to be frank, this whole fight feels very situational, especially since Maka's power, as I've been saying, is dependent on how she resonates with Soul. On one hand, my brain says Maka is going to win, but on the other, my heart says Ruby could win. Personally speaking, I really want Ruby to win, since she is my favorite character. Well, regardless of the outcome, let's hope it lives up to the hype as we head into the 200th episode of Death Battle. Okay, that's the end for this video. If you have any other ideas regarding the capabilities of these two characters, just leave a comment down below. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button.